Crack the door. Just a little. But there's a possibility that pain won't be there one day. This was the conversation I came up with after years of working with people in chronic pain. And to understand why I created that conversation, we have to start with a brief understanding of pain science. Now, pain science is a relatively new science, basically just a theory at this point, not completely proven, but it gives us an understanding how pain works. In the past, people really believed that we had specific pain sensors, but as it turns out, what we have, they're called nociceptors, and they're not actually specific pain sensors. They can be triggered by mediators of inflammation from tissue damage, other mediators, but they can also be triggered by incredible stretch or pressure, and then extreme hot and cold. But the truth is, these nociceptors, these free nerve endings in these areas, they only send a danger message to the brain saying there's something wrong there. The brain will take that message and it will modulate that and decide whether or not to send back a pain signal. Now, the interesting things, a few interesting things are, one, that the brain modulates that pain according to the area of the body it's there and what's the history of that area. It also modulates according to what's our beliefs around that area. And then further understanding of pain science now says that the nociceptors in an area, they don't require mediators of inflammation from tissue damage to be activated and send the nonspecific danger signal to the brain. But, so they can actually be triggered without tissue damage. And what they figured out is that nociception can be triggered approximately 75% of the way to tissue damage, but you don't necessarily need tissue damage. And the fascinating thing about these little nociceptors is that over time, when they're triggered over and over again, eventually they start becoming more and more sensitive. So they could be 75, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20. And this might have a little bit to help us understand chronic pain, because in the end, it takes barely anything to trigger nociception. And then your history, if especially a back pain patient who's been in pain for a long time, there's been a lot of nociception from that one area. And as I found in the conversations I would have with new patients who had chronic pain, they would say, I know I'm going to be in pain forever, but if you can just help me a little bit, I'd really appreciate it. So I learned this all in a seminar with Dr. Lorimer Mosley, who's a doctorate in physiotherapy in Australia, and he's also a neuroscientist. And it was fascinating because his practice is based on phantom limb pain. Like I said, I would have this patient sitting in my clinic room on the chair right beside the door, and they would tell me about this pain they've been in and their belief, right? And like I said, the brain modulates pain according to the area, the history in the area, and belief. So I was trying to figure out a way I could challenge a belief without dipping into psychiatry or psychology or anything like that. How can I simply challenge a belief or have them challenge a belief? And I thought, why not just point at the door? And I would point right at the door and say, crack that door just a little, that there's a possibility that one day that pain won't be there. And it was really interesting because some people are really coachable and they would actually crack the door open. And I know, I can work with you. Now, from there, maybe that would break down as part of this belief inside them. Then I would start educating them, because the other beliefs that happen in people with chronic pain, and you've seen this on Roback set commercials and stuff like that, like pins pressing into the back and lightning come out of the back. There's this conversation that the human spine is a very weak and like fragile structure. I actually had the fortune to do cadaver labs going through my education, and I actually held a spine in my hand, and it's strong, heavy, it's full of massive muscles and strong ligaments. It's an actually incredibly strong structure. So that's not actually the problem. It's not a weak. So I would share with these people how the body is incredibly strong, resilient, and able to do incredible things. The body is built and designed to heal itself. It can and it will. So I'd be working on the next conversation. Now, the next thing is, there was this conversation in the world where if you're in pain, you should stop moving. There was a time when we immobilized everything, stopped moving and all that. And now what they realized is movement is medicine. But, as I was saying before, nociceptors, when they're triggered over and over again, they get more and more hypersensitive. So how can we get a person to move and not cause nociception? And I think another course I was in, they were talking about movement for back pain. I would coach people in, how far can you move? Can you move 1 centimeter in each direction? That's it, pain-free. I want you to do pain-free motion. Maybe they were seeing me in a week, maybe they're saying 2 weeks. So every day I want you to work on pain-free motion. So you're just moving 2 inches or 2 centimeters or a centimeter in each direction. And over time we move that up. See, another thing is you need to trust movement. You need to learn to move again, and you need to trust that you can move. And over time, people were able to build in more movement pain-free. Now, that's the great thing about nociceptors is, yes, they do become hypersensitive, but when nociception doesn't occur over time, they go from being hypersensitive to they start resetting 35, 40, 45, 55, 65, 70, 75. So they'll go back up to their normal baseline, where it would take 75% of the way to tissue damage to cause nociception. And the vast majority of the people I work with over the years, in 6 to 9 months, they were pain-free. So it's interesting, when I created that conversation, it was only about breaking down a belief to help a person with pain. And I remember I had this one patient, I had permission to talk about her situation. And she came in and she was in acute back pain. If you understand what a disc looks like, there's an outer coating, this really strong coating called the annulus fibrosus. And inside there's a gel called the nucleus pulposus. And what happens in some people is there's a weakness. And when there's a weakness, the gel bulges in a direction. And this will irritate the nerve endings, spinal cord. And that's what sciatica is. Now, more than likely what she was suffering from, because of the amount of pain, was some of that nucleus pulposus actually escaped the disc and was directly irritating the spinal cord. And we worked for about 7 weeks, and we did get some benefit. And I went through the same process, cracked the door just a little, that there's a possibility that one day that pain won't be there. I can't promise you, and I can't guarantee you, but just crack the door. And we went through the whole process. And yet, unfortunately, she was one of the people that it was just too much. And it's acute back pain. I understand. So she chose to go the surgical route. She had surgery. Now, it was about 4 or 5, maybe 6 months later, I got an email from her. She's like, look, I'd like to come back. I'm like, okay, great. And we caught up, and she'd had the surgery. Everything was pretty good. There was some tightness, so we could do some work. And during that conversation, she said, what was that crack the door thing? What was that? I'm like, oh yeah, crack the door, just a little, that there's a possibility that one day that pain won't be there. And she was like, that was great. So on our way out, she booked in 5 or 6 weeks later because she wanted to come and see me regularly. Now, on the day she came in, have you ever seen somebody bounce in the door, like just bouncing, like she's giggling, she's like, there is something really cool going on here. And I'm like super excited. We get into the room. She sits down. She says, I don't even care if we get to the massage today. I just got to tell you. I got to tell you this. I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. Remember last time we were talking about crack the door? I'm like, oh yeah, crack the door. She said, okay, so when I left your office that day, in my head, I was saying over and over again, where in my life am I not cracking the door? And she said that night, it came to her. This young woman was a highly skilled and very dedicated landscape architect. And through her education, she had this massive dream of working for one of these massive companies in the world. You know how life goes. We're going along, and then we get into a job, and we get comfortable, and we start forgetting the dream. And that woke her up. She's like, I'm going to crack the door. And that weekend, she redid her CV and her portfolio and cover letters for each of these companies, and she sent them off. And then she told me 2 weeks later, she got an email from one of them. And they're like, oh, thank you for your interest, but unfortunately, we're not hiring right now. And she was like, I'm going to keep on cracking the door. And shortly after, maybe a few days, she got another one from a company in the UK. And they were like, whoa, we are interested. Let's set up a meeting. And she went through an interview process. And what came out of the interview process was the fact that they really wanted her to come work for them. But the truth is, they weren't able to help her with her work permit. Because she's coming from Canada, going to the UK. She's like, no problem. My grandparents are from Europe. They still live there. I'll search that avenue. I'll see if I can find a way that I can get a work permit there. And because the EU was wide open, if you have a work permit in the EU, you can work in the UK back then. And she exhausted every avenue, and she wasn't able to. And yet she decided to keep cracking the door. She wrote them an email, said, hey, listen, I've done everything I can. I've followed every avenue I can. It looks like I'm not going to be able to get a work permit, but I really want to come work with you guys. This is my dream. Is there anything you can do for me? So they got back to her within 24 hours and set up a meeting. And when she got on that video chat meeting, she noticed that there was a lot more faces in that meeting than she expected. And I believe the story goes that the CEO came on and said, listen, we want you. You're exactly who we want. And what we've decided is we are going to sponsor you for a work permit. We're going to move you. We're going to pay for all the moving expenses from Canada to the UK. And we're going to put you up for 3 months so you can get stable. As well, we're going to help your husband get a work permit. And that's what happened when she cracked the door. A little while later, I was talking to one of the incredible athletes I work with that were coming into a national championship. And it was an interesting year because there was another runner who's just been crushing it, winning everything. And in this national championship, this runner was favored to be number 2. I was like, wonder if Crack the Door could help. So we're talking because we have some really cool, inspiring conversation, really open, and like for a young man, he's incredible. And so I told him about the story about Crack the Door and how it came along and that patient. He's like, well, yeah, Kimen, that sounds really cool, but how does that apply to me? I'm like, okay, imagine during this race. And you're sitting right behind this incredibly fast person that you believe is going to beat you. You believe that you're coming in second. And you don't even have a context for the possibility of you winning this race. So what if an opening comes where you could actually take the lead and possibly win? What if you don't believe that's possible? What if you don't have a crack in that door? Do you think you would even recognize that possibility coming at you? Let alone, do you think you'd even try and take it? And he just thought, to make a long story short, in that race, in the last 70 meters, he took the lead and he won the national championship. So where in your life are you not cracking the door?